Earlier this month I was in the Isle of Skye, walking part of the Skye Trail, and this month I wanted to share one of my favourite stories from Skye, which I first heard from storyteller Beverley Bryant at the Scottish International Storytelling Festival a few years ago. Now, the Isle of Skye in Gaelic, Cuillin and Cuillin means the winged isle, and if you look on a map you can see that it's got lots of different wings. But its poetic name is Cuillin, the Isle of the Mist, and the mist is particularly fitting for this story. Quite some time ago, a group of lassies headed out to the lower slopes of the Cuillin hills to collect blaeberries. One of the lassies wandered higher and higher, seeking out the fattest, juiciest, sweetest blaeberries, and she was totally absorbed in what she was doing, until she felt a sharp, cold breeze on the back of her legs, and she looked up and about her and realised that a mountain mist had descended, completely obliterating her surroundings. She hadn't the faintest idea where she was anymore. So she called out to her companions, but there was no reply. So she turned to try and retrace her steps, but the mist was so thick as it swirled around that she couldn't be sure which way she'd come. So very cautiously and very slowly she began taking step after step, but unfortunately she'd picked the wrong direction, because after a while the blaeberry and the heather beneath her feet turned to bare rock, and she stood stock still, absolutely terrified to take another step in case she pitched over the edge of a crag or down into a mountain burn. And as she was standing there, completely still, she began to hear footsteps approaching her, and the sound was really eerie through the mist. And then she saw huge ghostly shapes coming closer and closer, and she was absolutely terrified. And the breeze blew and sort of parted the mist a little, and she saw that it was in fact a herd of deer, and they were mostly hinds with all their calves in tow, and they didn't seem in the slightest bit bothered that the girl was there. So it occurred to her that if she followed them, they might just lead her to safety. So very carefully and very quietly she began following the deer as they grazed up the mountain, and up they went, higher and higher into the Cuillin, until they reached the mouth of a cave, where an old woman and an old man were sitting on little wooden stools either side of a dark pool in the floor, into which they were gazing intently. When the old woman noticed the deer, she got up and went to fetch her milking pail that was in the back of the cave, and then she caught sight of the girl, and she said, "What are you doing here?" And the girl told her story and showed her her basket of blaeberries, and asked if she could shelter there for the night. "Shelter for one night we cannot give," said the old woman, "but shelter for a year and a day shall be yours if you help me with the dairy, for I grow old. The deer will take you back to the sea after a year and a day." So the girl, somewhat out of options at this point, agreed, and so she spent the next year learning from the old woman all about all of the mountain plants. She would pick wild thyme from the rocky, craggy places. She would pick meadowsweet and wild mint from down by the burns. And she would pick gold and asphodel and fragrant bog myrtle from the swampy, boggy places. And then she would watch as the old woman dried these herbs and then sprinkle them directly on the fire, over which a huge cauldron hung, full of milk, for the old woman was making crowdie. Now crowdie is a type of soft cheese, and the making of this crowdie was the old woman's whole life. And as she made her crowdie, the old man sat on his little wooden stool on the side of the pool in the floor of the cave and gazed into it intently, for in it was mirrored the whole world. And when the crowdie was ready, he would fetch it and begin moulding it into shapes and figures that he'd seen reflected in the pool. And this was his whole life, for he and the old woman were the makers of dreams. Every evening, the old man would take his dreams in both his hands and walk out to the mouth of the cave and hold up his dreams to catch the light of the setting sun. Now, in his right hand, he held all of the good dreams, all of the true dreams, and down from the skies came the birds of good omen, so the eagles and the falcons and the skylarks, and they collected his dreams and took them out into the world. But in his left hand he held the bad dreams, the false dreams, the deceitful dreams. And down from the corries swooped the corvids, stinking of death, the ravens and the kites, and they collected his dreams and took them out into the world. And after a year and a day, the old woman came to the girl and thanked her for her service and for her hard work, and said that she would be well rewarded. And then the old woman turned to the leader of the deer, quite an elderly hind who was turning slightly grey, and asked her if the herd would lead the girl safely down the mountain. So the herd took the girl down a mountain path which the girl had never seen before, she didn't even know existed, down to a shore, to a beach that the girl also didn't recognise. And then the deer encircled her and all looked out to sea. So the girl too looked out to sea, and the sun was just rising, so she shielded her eyes from the sun and looked out, and she could just make out a little coracle made of animal skins bobbing towards her. And in it there was a youngish lad with golden hair that was shining in the sunlight, and he was wearing a golden hoop necklace which showed that he must be a prince. Well, the girl immediately fell in love, and the lad landed his coracle and walked purposefully up to the girl and told her that he'd seen her in his dreams, and he asked her if she would be his wife. And she agreed, of course, so they hopped back into the coracle, back across the sea to the land of the prince, where the girl eventually became queen, and she taught the people of that country lots and lots to do with the meaning of dreams. And so goes that story.